Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Corrie Crawford Van Oss. Corrie joins us, having this being her first time as a guest on a podcast. Is that right, Corrie?
Thank you. Yes, that it is my first time on a podcast. So, hey, life goal accomplished.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly very thankful to have you join us today on the SRS podcast. Let's not jump into our content too quickly. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and your ministry.
Thanks. I would love to do that. I live in Orlando, Florida, and I work with Reliant Mission currently. Most of my ministry years were with Campus Crusade, and most of that time was in Eastern Europe. So as a 21-year-old straight out of college, I signed up and I went into Soviet Poland as a missionary. And I experienced God's call really to be in Eastern Europe. So from 92 till around 2007, I lived there full time. That was, post-Soviet era. I was raising support for ministry all those years. The Lord also moved me to our headquarters in Budapest, Hungary, and then brought me back to Orlando where Campus Crusade's headquarters were.
Okay.
So I, family-wise, I was single all those years. I met my wonderful husband about 10 years ago. We've been married 9 years, and I moved from into Reliant Mission about 6 years ago, where I guide the international programs, and I've also been guiding the people who coach our fundraisers.
Right. And I tell you, that is a growing conversation that we're having, is about coaching fundraisers. We're not going to delve too much into that right now, but I do find it interesting how you said that you were raising support all that time. Just for a point of clarity with that, is it accurate for our listeners to understand that you raised up your full support, but you still had a little bit of maintenance to do along the way? You were, we use the term fully funded around here. You were fully funded during that time?
Okay, so I know like Campus Crusade leadership will hear this. So I was fully funded to my satisfaction. I was not fully funded to other people's satisfaction during many of those years. But that did change. As I hit my 30s and 40s, I got fully funded.
Sure. Well, we learned some lessons along the way, don't we?
We do.
Yeah, that's that I appreciate you just being open and honest about that. I think that's rather common for Great Commission ministry leaders to have their own personal definition of fully funded and what's enough. And sometimes it's a rather skinny definition. Some might even go so far as to call it anorexic. I had someone say that to me about their own view of their support raising when their definition of fully funded. And I'm definitely not making any fun of anorexia. I know it's a very real and serious condition, but it does imply that sometimes when people are getting going, they learn a few lessons and they go, wow, being healthy, fully funded is different from what I'm currently defining as fully funded, right?
Right. Well, and I definitely learned that the worker's worthy of the wage, and we plan for our future. And honestly, I'd say in the second half of my time of fundraising, I've been on a salary the last 6 years, but in my second half of my fundraising years, I focused on abundance. And the Lord allowed me to fund some tremendous ministry opportunities in addition to that which, paid for my expenses and salary and retirement and all that.
Right. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing all that. And of course, we invited you today to come on and talk a little bit about what you have seen and what you have noticed, having not only personally living off support all those years, and even sounds like a maturation process you had, but also what you're seeing to be true now as you have worked with and coached and overseen people that need to raise support themselves. So with that being said, let's back up. What circumstances led to you really even getting to that place where you're doing work on helping people evaluate whether or not they're ready, because that's a big issue for people sometimes. What is their readiness? Are they able to start raising support and move towards the field? Tell us a little bit about what you've learned in all of that.
Yeah. Well, part of my role currently, and I do think even when I was overseas, there was a journey of learning how we assess people, how we screen, how we bring people at the right time for them. Probably personally, I had years when I was raising support when I was not in the healthiest place, and there are other times when I was healthier. So I know there's up and downs in life. When we engage someone in the support raising process, you know, honestly, some of my work has come out of my own fear for people, because it's hurtful to me if someone doesn't do well and is injured as a result of not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
So, probably many years ago, I was asking, when is a person ready? What are the situations that indicate it's the right time for someone to move
Mm-hmm.
ahead? And, what are just simple indicators of that? At Reliant Mission, when people work with us, we have a full assessment process. And I've been very involved in updating that at points and bringing in topics where we can clarify, yes, it's the right time for someone. And there were some situations where we had people very gifted for ministry, very gifted. And for their ministries that they were planning to do after they got their funds raised, they were ideal. But
Mm-hmm.
there were several times when people had something going on so that the fundraising part of the ministry, they did not, they washed out in that phase. And that's, I hate to ever see someone do that.
Right.
So I'm highly motivated to help a person see if they're not quite ready and help them know, how do you put the right foundation so they go from strength to strength in
Right.
the
Right.
process.
Hey, tell us a little bit about that, because I think you and I are on the same page that if God calls us, we absolutely need to move forward and take steps of faith and not be scared of raising support. But I as well have certainly met some people that their readiness just wasn't there. So God was certainly calling them to something, but it wasn't so much right now. It was really they needed to start preparing their life, organizing some things, and really getting ready to raise their full support and move to the field. And that sometimes that's a tough pill to swallow for some people. I think of a friend that he and his wife had $40,000 in consumer debt,
Mm.
and they were ready to raise enough support to pay off all their credit card bills and move to Mexico. And they had to have some tough conversations where people that knew them and loved them and surrounded them had to come back to them and say, "Hey, you need to clean up your own mess here. We would
Mm.
love to support you after you pay off your own debt. You've really made some bad choices with finances. We feel like you need to clean up that mess before you're ready to go forward and all this." That was a tough pill for them to swallow. What are some other circumstances that maybe you've personally seen it or you've heard about it, where godly, wonderful men and women that are called to full-time service, their readiness factor just wasn't quite where it needed to be yet?
Yeah. Well, in the we actually have 6 areas that we look at, and some of it has to do with the length of calling. Some of we look in that area. We look in the area of how clear is their job that they're going to. We look at the area of somebody's emotional readiness and their moral strength. Not
Mm-hmm.
that anyone's perfect, but that they're functioning in victory. We look at what is the network that they already have developed that they bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also look at, do they have the tools that they need? And financial readiness is one of those things that we look at. Like in our context, we find that donors are okay with some student loan debt. But as you mentioned, most donors are not very happy about paying for someone's consumer debt. So,
Mm-hmm.
financially, when someone is in tough straits, maybe they don't know how to manage their money yet. And
Yeah.
maybe some bad situations have come to them, but we don't want to see somebody start when they're in bill collection or they've had a recent bankruptcy or,
Right.
as you mentioned, a large amount of consumer debt. Any debt it would be best if any consumer debt is paid before they start. But even if it's not, it has to be a small enough proportion that it's a small amount of their paycheck.
Right.
So we
Right.
just try to look for proportions to paycheck like that.
So, and I know you can't share names, but maybe you could share us an example of somebody that, boy, they wanted to be ready, but you had to lovingly have the tough conversation where you say, you know what, you're not ready, and here's why.
Right, right. Well, would you rather I talk about a financial situation or a calling situation?
You know what? Give us both. I think our listeners are very interested in hearing both. I mean, obviously, you can't tell a 20-minute story with name and address and phone number, that kind of
Sure.
stuff. But
No, I
if
wouldn't
you
do
could give us
that.
a couple different overviews, I really think that the listeners would really benefit from hearing some really practical examples that you've seen in real life.
Yeah. Well, one of my situations, I wrote about it in the article that you guys published. And it was really a learning lesson for the ministry and also for the person who is raising support. So I got a call from a wonderful church mission pastor, and they had a wish to have a ministry in the Caribbean. And they had sent on a summer program a woman who was in her early 30s who was really ready to change direction and embrace something new. And on so many levels, she looked like it was the ideal time, the ideal person, and etc. for the ministry. And one of the things I saw as the whole situation unfolded, sometimes we're very excited about what's next and we just jump in, which I'm for that. That's faith is full of jumping in. In this situation, the young woman and the mission pastor actually did not know each other. And they actually walked into a lot of conflict over the time that she was making application and starting the process of raising support.
Mm,
And they didn't know things yet, like what laws existed or the location where she would do this work with children who are in trouble in the Caribbean location.
mm,
And so it was all this promise. And she quit her job and she came to our launch week, and she started the process of raising support. Yet all the time, what she was going to do, when she was going to be there, who exactly she was going to work with, were not clear. And it really dissolved, I think, into probably a difficult situation for a lot of people. There
mm,
just was not enough foundational planning for that. I think, she may have just jumped in thinking it was going to be an easy process to raise the funds.
mm,
Maybe she wasn't ready for that process of personally inviting people into a partnership team. But also, her ministry just did not have really enough clarity for her to communicate to people so they could join her team.
mm.
So
Oh, that's
I
really
would,
hard.
yeah, it is hard, and that situation is something I see replayed more typically. Um, a lot of the ministries we work with, they are themselves very sensitive to debt issues. So I don't actually see a lot of people who have tremendous debt even get to the application phase with us.
Mhm.
Maybe they look at our application and know what they have to answer and they self select out. I don't know.
Right. Right.
But it is
Yeah.
very true that if a person does not have enough to live off of and they themselves are feeling stress about living,
Hmm.
when they sit down with a potential ministry partner, that partner senses that and it
Right.
kind of puts up a wall.
It's important now and then that we mention that we have a resource available to those who help train and coach others that are raising support. The SRS network really isn't for everyone, but it is for those who are seeking to shape direction, build infrastructure, elevate training, and multiply coaching in their ministry culture. We can provide individual or organizational access to other support raising resources in order to help you help others who are within your ministry. Learn more at supportraisingSolutions.org/network.
Let me
We
throw
agree
something
with
in real
that.
quick here because I get the opportunity to talk with many missions organizations, and if you as a listener you're really concerned about your debt right now, I just want to encourage you to breathe. I've seen a lot of different ministries that have said, hey, we want you to go through a financial peace university, or we want you to go through something like this first. Like, there is hope. So if you've made some poor financial choices, that doesn't mean that you have excluded yourself from ever serving Jesus. That is not what we're saying at all. But I know that even my wife and I, our first 7 years of marriage, we did what Dave Ramsey calls stupid with zeros on the end. Like, we just made so many terrible financial decisions in our first 7 years of marriage. And then we got some personal finance help and training. And we have been married over 26 years now at the time of recording. And, so we've had almost 20 years of better choices. But wow, did we make a lot of mistakes first? And by God's grace, I really believe, Corrie, that a lot of the decisions that my wife and I made once we decided to get serious about our personal finance, I believe a lot of those decisions really prepared us for raising support and living as missionary types. And so, just to the listeners, I want to say, if you're struggling with your finances, welcome to the club. A lot of us have been in that club or are in that club, and there is hope. And by the way, I hear a lot of organizations that they will work with people that have student loan debt, so long as, kind of like what you said, Corrie, it's not a crazy amount, and allow you to raise some support. But they're less likely if you just had to have a brand new car and you're living beyond your means and all that kind of stuff. That's where usually there's yellow flags, and they want you to pause before moving forward. So, Corrie, you were not being overly harsh on anybody about finances, but I think it is it's enough of a thing that a lot of missions organizations, including Reliant, your organization is pretty concerned if somebody's trying to go to the mission field as a way of paying off all their debt, right?
Oh, absolutely. And Aaron, I'll tell you something similar, but a little different that we see more often, that we really need to help people lift their eyes and change their habits about. And that is, when someone comes to ministry and they're thinking about finances, I call it the name that tune game, where, like that game show, you try to name the tune in as few notes as possible. If you could name the tune in 3 notes, you win the game. Mm-hmm. People think that easily, that when you come into ministry, you're supposed to live off as little as possible. And so people walk with a very penny pinching mindset that results in being close-fisted, lacking generosity. And I would say, if someone knows they need to get their financial house in order, be sure a leading component of that is active generosity, financially and in other ways, because that's really the kind of financial mindset that God calls us to in ministry. Yes, we can be sacrificial, but can we also be stewards and be generous and make sure all the people around us are taken care of?
Yeah.
Our culture prefers that anyone who raised support is poor and living in poverty. But that's not necessarily what will win the war, the battle, in other words, that God's inviting us to engage in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing that we screen for and watch for is moral and emotional stamina. This has such an impact on people potentially while they're raising support. Aaron, I'd like to draw the picture, like, what does it take to accomplish a fully funded goal with 60-something ministry partners? I've talked about sometimes the number of rejections that a person is going to face on the way to developing their team. Now, statistically, it's all fine that you have 9 people say no for every 1 person who says yes. Like, in the world around us, that's actually pretty decent statistics. But when someone is facing that as the fundraiser, it becomes very personal. So I can think of varieties of people, and probably their stories swim in my mind a little bit. But we had to learn that a person needed to really have that inner strength to encounter all that. So I'm thinking of a young man. He's actually from a mixed race background. He's not a white person. he really had such passion for ministry, and his church leadership just really felt that he was the next generation. One of the things that he encountered is that, when he would sit down with a potential partner, there are many things that he faced that I didn't always face when I was raising support. So that person he was speaking to who's not in an evangelical culture, they were like, why would you raise money? Why would I give money to you? Why doesn't the church just pay you? So he had those obstacles.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think there were many other things where in the minds of people he was meeting with, he was diminishing himself as a person to ask for funding. And he really encountered situation after situation where people were trying to save him from fundraising. And I remember that sometimes when I raised my support, people would be like, oh, okay, I'll support you. But how about if I get you in the sales plan so you make your own money so you don't have to live off the support? Or how about if I introduce you to some business so you're self-sustaining?
Yeah.
And, it's
By the way, I laugh because it's not funny, because I had somebody try and pull that on me like last month. A guy called me and goes, hey, here's this great idea for you instead. And I was just like, I think you're missing the point, brother. So yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. That's it's funny, not funny, because I think a lot of us have been there. Here,
right.
Do this other thing so you don't have to raise support, because they don't understand what a joy it is. So anyway, your story with this brother in Christ, he was really coming up against a lot of opposition.
He was, and I would say he's one of those people who gave it a try, but ended up really kind of washing out in the process. And, so on that emotional, moral front, it has multifaceted. On the simple emotional front, a person needs to be thinking about, do I have the inner stamina to not only encounter rejections, but maybe even shape the culture or the thinking of people around me. And that takes a lot of inner strength.
Yeah.
So we look for, evidence that they've been able to face opposition or face difficulties, and still be buoyant, still be joyful about life, still have optimism about life, those kinds of things. So that's one more example.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. And by the way, if anybody's listening and you're not that familiar with the podcast, I would challenge you, if you're like, wait a minute here, are they saying that only Caucasians can raise support and be fully funded? Absolutely not. There are many, many brothers and sisters in Christ and non-Americans and Americans who are fully funded, but it can be a different field. It can be a different experience in raising support. So I'd encourage you to go back and listen to some of our other podcasts, or even our articles on SRS's website, such as those written by Danielle Sparks or Erica Fouché. They bring a great amount of wisdom to that conversation. But that is a different conversation, but since we touched on it, and I want to be sensitive, I don't want anyone feeling like that, Corrie or I think that, support raising is a thing for just white Americans, because nothing could be further from the truth. So,
and I've seen Africans, lead movements of fundraisers in their own nations. And I've seen African Americans do tremendously. And I just want to say, part of the ability is to be able to go against the cultural flow. And there are white people in the same circumstance. There are portions of my original support team that were like, why would you do this? You're crazy.
Oh, for sure.
And you have to, we're shaping culture as we share what God's doing in our life.
Yeah. Good. Well, hey, here's what I'd like to do, Corrie, because I think you and I have a lot more to talk about. So I think we're at that perfect ending spot for this week. And Corrie, I know you have a lot more to share. So I want to thank you, first of all, for joining us on the SRS podcast.
Absolutely.
And let's go ahead and get together again soon and continue this conversation. And we'll put it in the next episode. So thank you again.
Thank you, Aaron. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.